Hi, and welcome to Empty Nest Creations. My name is Wendy. Thank you for joining me today. Our project today is going to be this wood caddy. It has a really nice spindle handle. It has a divider, so it's got 2 compartments. It's really nice, a nice size. So you could use this to kind of corral everything on your coffee table. You could use it with some florals to make a centerpiece. It would also be great for like on your buffet table to have your napkins and your silverware out in a nice container. So we're going to update this today with some color. The colors that we're going to use, we're going to do a little paint mixing. Green is really in right now, and so we're going to paint this green. And the paint I've got is this Country Chic paint, and this color is called Hollow Hill. It's a really dark green, and we're going to mix that with Country Chic's paint in crinoline. This is just a white color, you see there on the bottom, and we're going to mix these 2 paints together to get just a little bit of a lighter shade of green. And I'm also going to be using Country Chic's beeswax distressing bar. So basically the idea behind this is that you rub it on your piece anywhere that it would maybe naturally get distressed, like corners, on the handle. There'll be spots where it would be naturally distressed. And so you rub the wax on, then you put your paint on. Once the paint has dried, you just take a really light grit sandpaper and you go over those spots where you put the wax. Wax acts as a resist to paint. And so it's going to make it really easy to get back to this natural stained wood tone that we've got without going all the way down to the unstained wood, which is sometimes a possibility when you're distressing with sandpaper. So with this distressing bar, you could paint your piece one color, then put the distressing wax on wherever you want it, paint a contrasting color on top, and then you can distress back to that first color instead of going all the way back to the wood. So there's lots of uses for this, and we're going to try it out today. Okay, so now that you can see the jar, I'm going to open up the Hollow Hill. Now this is a clay-based paint. It is certified low VOC. VOCs are the chemicals that are usually in paint and cleaning products that are harmful for the environment and aren't great for us either. So I just filled up the measuring cup to the line on there. I think it's 30 milliliters. And now I'm pouring that into the bottle. And I'm just going to use my fork to kind of scrape all that out. And I'm going to do another cupful of the green. Pouring it right up to that 30 milliliter line. Okay. Now before I close this container back up, I'm going to use a wipe and just wipe that paint off. That's always a great idea, so that your lid doesn't get stuck on. Oftentimes I forget to do that, and then the next time I want to use the paint, I have a hard time getting the lid off because I got paint all around the edges of the rim. And so if you can just remember to wipe it off before you put the lid back on, that really does help get the lid off easier the next time. Okay, again, I'm just scraping that in there. Now, I am mixing up way more than what we're going to need for this project. And if I'd had a measuring cup that had multiple markings on it, then I probably would have done one of these and then a half of the white, but I don't know exactly where the half is. So we're just gonna do 2 to 1. So now I'm using the color Crinoline. Just a really nice white. It's a really nice shade of white. It doesn't have the blue tones in it. So now just scrape again. Okay. I'm going to use this wipe, get the paint off my hand, and then we're going to wipe the outside of the crinoline container before we put the lid back on. And no matter how hard I try, I cannot do any painting project without getting paint all over myself. So all I've done so far is pour paint, and I've got it all over me. Okay, so I'm gonna set that aside, and then I'm gonna use my fork to blend these two paints together. I am working on scraping the sides of the jar because I really want to get this mixed in. Then what I'm going to do, I'm tapping the fork to get as much of that paint off as I can. I even use my paintbrush to help it out a little bit. Now, of course, Country Chic carries several different shades of green, so I probably could have gone and picked one off the shelf that was more of the color that I wanted, but I want to show you that with just a couple of colors in your stash, you can really create any shade that you want. Now I'm just shaking it up. This is probably the easiest and best way to mix the paint and make sure that we get it all mixed in. Now, I keep all of the little jars that we empty out in the kitchen, whether it's a pickle jar or you know, one that held peppers or olives or whatever. If it's a glass jar and it has a lid, I hold on to it. Okay, so now this is the shade of green that we have. Very different from where it started. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and use our distressing bar to distress this piece wherever we think that it would normally get wear and tear. Okay, so handles are definitely going to get some wear, right, from picking it up and moving it around. So I'm just going to take my bar and rub it in some places on the handle. And on the edges. They always get dinged up on the edges. And I'm just taking it right here and just rubbing it straight across to give it, you know, where your hands would grip, that it would make it would be distressed some. I'm also going to distress right here on the edges. And on these center pieces, I'm going to distress on the edges. Now, natural wear and tear doesn't normally happen like down here on these flat surfaces. So I'm not really going to do anything down there. I'm going to do some of these edges. Okay. Corners always get dinged up. And you do want to be a little random. You don't want everything to look exactly the same. Because things don't distress all in the same place, right? Alright, and then I'm going to do a little bit right here on this bottom trim piece. Okay. I'm not sure if I got this going or not. Alright, so we are now ready to begin painting. I'm going to start painting the inside, and then I'm going to leave the handle for last. That will help me to maneuver it while I paint. So I'm just going to start with the inside, and I had shoulder surgery recently, so that's why my reach is kind of funny. I don't have all of my range of motion back yet, but I am working on that in physical therapy. And the more I move it, the better it's going to be. So, but I still can't do everything that I was able to do before. But we're getting there. Okay, so you can see that I started painting on the inside. This paint, like I said earlier, it's clay based, so it covers really, really well. We may only have to do one coat and maybe a touch up. Okay, so I wanted to bring you back for just a second to show you that this paint is drying really quickly as I go. And I've painted everything but the handles. I just noticed that there's this little section right here under the handle that didn't get painted, so let me paint that. And I wanted to show you, this is round, and sometimes round surfaces are really hard to paint. So what I do is, instead of going side to side, where doing that motion is going to catch paint in all of these crevices. So instead of doing that, I'm going to go this way, painting side to side, just moving my brush quickly across the surface. This is the easiest way to paint spindles or legs onto furniture. It's just difficult to paint it from left to right. You want to go up and down, and then we can just go under here and make sure that we get the underside painted really well. Some more paint. And then we're just going to continue to paint up and down across this piece. And as I'm going, I'm really trying to make sure that my paint is smooth. You want to watch for runs or drips as you're going. So I'm going to turn this around so I can get to the other side. And we'll do the same thing here. Just brushing up and down. Paint the end. You definitely want to make sure you get the underside as you go. Looking at the camera to get this end down here, make sure it's covered really well. Take a peek underneath. Make sure that we got it all well and covered. So there's your first coat, and parts of it are already dry, and I've just painted straight through, just a couple of minutes of painting. So I'm gonna let this dry, and then we'll come back and we'll do that second coat. It's probably gonna be a very light second coat, and we'll let that second coat dry, and then we'll come back to the distressing. Okay, so the first coat is dry. There are some spots where you can see kind of right over here. I'm trying to not get my hand in front of the camera. Right here you can see some of the wood is coming through, and down in the inside part, same thing. And on the outside edges, like right in here, you can see some of the wood coming through. So we are going to do a second coat, but I'm going to use a spray bottle just with some water in it, and I'm going to be painting it, spray water, and then put the paint on. This just really makes the paint smoother for the second coat. It helps you to cover up some of the spots that it is showing through the wood, without using a whole lot of paint. So what I'm gonna do before we start is I'm gonna give our paint a shake. Make sure it's mixed up really well. I am loving this color. It is a muted green. It's not a super bright, you know, like grassy green. This is much more muted, but I really just love this color. I think that you could use this for the entire year. Sometimes green is the tones or the color makes it, you know, more apt for holidays rather than year round. But I think this could carry you through spring and summer, into fall, and even into the winter with Christmas. You could, you know, use this piece all year round because the green is such just a beautiful muted green color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of water, spray a little water, and then we're just going to take the paint, and I'm going to try to get this so you can see what I'm doing. I don't know how that's going to work. Okay, here we go. So I've just sprayed a little water, and I'm just going to start putting the paint on. And the water really does help to kind of spread the paint out. Now you certainly could just go in and you know, paint a whole second coat of paint on here, but it doesn't really need a full whole coat of paint. Now this is clay-based paint, and so when you spray it with water, it does reactivate the paint, okay, until it's had time to cure. So you do want to be careful. You don't want to really soak it with water. You want to just use a little bit of water to help kind of float the paint onto your piece. Okay, so the piece is dried, and now we're ready to distress. Now, when it comes to country chic paint and distressing, you have several options. So you can do like we're doing today, and you can use the beeswax distressing bar, which makes it really easy. You can use sandpaper to distress. Without that, you just come in after it's dry and you just lightly sand the places that you want it to be distressed. Or you can wet distress, which is where you take a washcloth, a paper towel. I've even seen people use baby wipes that's slightly damp, and you just rub the cloth over the places that you want it to be distressed. You want to do wet distressing when it's dried for maybe an hour or 2 hours, okay? If you let it dry for a couple of days, it's going to be much more difficult to wet distress. But if you do want to let it sit for a couple of days, then you can, of course, do that and distress with sandpaper. Today we use the distressing bar, so we've put it on several places. There are some places where I can actually see the wax build up. What you want to do is kind of try to remember where you put the wax, so you make sure that you're distressing in those areas. I'm using a piece of 320 grit sandpaper. This is just a piece that I cut off. Now with sandpaper, the higher the number, the finer the grit, okay? So if it were like an 80, then that's going to be really coarse, and it's going to take off more at one time. So if I were to be finishing a table or a dresser or some piece of furniture, and I needed to take off old paint or take off the finish that was on the paint, if I want to take it down to bare wood, then I'm going to start with like an 80 grit and move my way up to a finer grit, okay? Because that higher grit is going to take off a lot of paint at one time. So the higher the number, the finer the grit. And I don't know if you can really see that in the camera, but this is very fine grit sandpaper. What I'm going to do is I have an old sanding sponge, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. It's really cushiony, so it's great for doing distressing on your pieces. And I've used this one so much. It's kind of, pieces are missing, and it's got a lot of old paint and stuff on it. So I'm just going to wrap this 320 grit sandpaper around my sanding block. And then I'm just going to start sanding where I know that I put the wax. Okay, so I know I put some up here. We're just going to just lightly sand. And you see right there on the top where I hit it with that beeswax bar, that has come off, okay? So I'm just going to continue to do that, going over the places where we put the wax. And it just really does make it a lot easier. Let's see if I can get that in the shot. There, you see the wood coming through. That's where the wax was. And so that just makes it really easy to get the wax off in those spots. There you go, right there. You see where it took that, that's right where we put the wax, and it came off super easy. With not a lot of effort, okay? Well, remember that I did these corners, so I'm just gonna run the sandpaper across there. And like I said, there's some places where you can actually see that the wax kind of built up on the edges. That makes it a lot easier for me to know where to to sand. And like I said, you can do this without the wax. You just would probably need a coarser sandpaper. So if I had not, you don't want super coarse, but if I had not put the wax on, I'd probably be using like a 220, which is a little bit coarser than this. And that would just help you to get the paint off wherever you wanted it to a little bit easier. But since we use the wax, I'm able to just use this piece of 320 to do our distressing. Curved edges are a little more difficult, so you want to remember that. It's a little more challenging to get in there and actually sand those edges. So we're just going to go all the way around, sanding off that wax where we put the wax. This is going to give it a nice vintage look. Now, if you're like me and you watch a lot of YouTube videos, then you've probably heard the term cottagecore, which is kind of the new buzzword for the way people are decorating their homes today. For a couple of years now, people have been doing farmhouse decorating, which is a lot of black and white. They've incorporated a little bit of gray into that, but everything's just really simple and very vintage looking, black and white, very muted colors. Cottagecore is the trend that we're seeing now, where the green is coming in, a lot of green, more earth tones, more florals, and I think that for most of us, it's not really a huge change, and I think that a lot of people's design aesthetic is more blended anyway. You know, there may be some people who were all out farmhouse, but I think for the most part, we all have pieces that we've collected over the years, or pieces that were handed down to us. I know when I first got married and I was in my 20s, my husband's grandmother gave us some pieces that we still use to this day. Some pieces that are would be considered, you know, collectible, very antique. I have a huge glass lance jar that she gave to me. His grandfather worked for the school system, and so he would bring that type of stuff home all the time. And so that was something that she gave to us. And so, you know, I've had those pieces in my home for 30-something years. And there's other pieces that we keep that we really, we love that piece. It's something that maybe someone special gave to us, or something that, you know, we went out and found, and we just love it. And so no matter what style our house is decorated in, that piece is going to be there. And so a lot of us have already had, you know, some color and some things like that in our decor already. But cottagecore is just really kind of focusing on adding a little more color. So you're seeing some blues, some greens, and a lot of florals going on. And so this is a great way to start introducing a little bit of color. For me, I have a booth at a flea market, and for a while I was doing a lot of just white, black, and gray pieces. And I walked in one day and thought, wow, this is kind of bland. You know, it needed some color. And of course, I always was using like floral greenery and stuff like that. But bringing in some pieces that have just a little bit of color really makes a huge difference. So on a white bookcase, I might have some, you know, iron pieces, some books and things like that, and then to pop a green tote Caddy onto that shelf and put something in it, like florals or whatever, it really just kind of livens things up, you know. So the great thing about paint is that you can change it up, you know. It's an easy way to add color, and then when you get tired of this being green, you can paint it another color. You could, you know, paint it white. You could paint it black. You could take this paint off and go natural wood. So it's really easy to change things up with just a little bit of paint. So I'm gonna clean this up. So what I will do is just take a slightly damp paper towel and wipe over it, because where you sanded, it's got kind of a chalky look right now. And so you want to just wipe it down with a damp rag, and that's going to bring it all back to the same color. And for this piece, I'm going to seal it with some clear coat. So I'm just going to put one light coat on here, and then that's going to protect it. If this were like a picture frame or, you know, something, a shelf sitter of some sort, I may not seal it, but because this is a tote and we're going to be putting things in and taking things out, you do want to protect your paint. So I am going to use just a light coat of the clear coat. Put that on, we'll let that dry, and then it'll be ready to use. Okay, so this is the Country Chic clear coat, and this is the perfect finish for any piece that you're going to use a lot. Now, the parts of the clear coat have settled to the bottom, and so you want to stir your clear coat before you use it. You want to stir it well. You can use a paint stick or something like that. You don't want to shake it, because shaking it will create air bubbles, which you will then put onto your piece, and it will make your finish uneven. Okay, so you want to just stir it, doing it gently so that it's not creating air bubbles. And I'm just using the ends of a paintbrush to do this. Nice and gentle. You can feel the thickness at the bottom, so you just want to make sure that you're getting that all worked together. Okay. All right, so I'm going to wipe this down, and I'm going to get a plate to pour some of this out onto. Because we've sanded and distressed, and I've wiped it down, but there still could be some particles of paint, and we don't want to introduce that into our clear coat. Because then the next time you use it, it's not really clear. It's going to be a shade of green or a shade of blue or a shade of black. So I just have a little styrofoam plate. I'm going to pour a little bit of this onto the plate. It's not going to take much. And I'm going to wipe this off again. You want to make sure that the rim of your jar is clean, because this is, if you get some of this clear coat on the rim and then you put the lid back on, it is definitely going to stick. Okay. Now, we're going to do this exactly like we painted the piece to begin with. Starting on the inside, putting a coat on the inside, and then we're going to move to the outside. Okay, so I'm going to tilt this up so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And just like we did the original first coat, I'm just going in and putting on this clear coat. Again, you want to make sure that you're watching for drips or runs. You don't want anything that's going to mess up the smooth finish. Okay, and you can see it gets shiny, and that kind of helps you to see any places that you've missed. Now this is going to dry matte, so it's not, doesn't have a really glossy sheen to it. If you wanted a more of a glossy sheen, you could use another brand of clear coat to get that kind of sheen. But usually with chalk paint, we're wanting it to be flat or matte. And so this works really, really well. So once I have it on, then I'm just going to come back with my brush and do long strokes going across to make sure everything is nice and smooth. Okay? Now I'm going to continue to do this, and then I will bring you back to show you what it looks like once I have the clear coat over the entire piece. Okay, so I've got the clear coat on the entire piece. So what I'm going to do now before it really starts to dry is I want to inspect the piece. So what I'm looking for is drips or anywhere where it's like too thick. So like right here, I see it drip, so I'm just going to take my wet brush and just swipe that up to clear that up. Like I said, this has a sheen while it's wet, so it's really easy. I'm looking for places that I might have missed, places that don't have that sheen. As I turn it, see another little place where it's dripping. The clear coat is thin. It's much thinner than the paint, so it does have a tendency to run if you put too much on your brush. Okay, you also want to check for your corners and your edges. So when you're painting and you get to that corner and you swipe across that edge, sometimes it puts some paint on the other side. Okay, so as I'm looking, I'm just going to make sure that that it doesn't have drips or excess paint on the edges, and everything looks good now. So now all we have to do, I see another little drip. So now all we have to do is wait for it to dry. I'm going to let it dry for a couple of hours, and then it'll be finished. Now I did not paint the bottom of this piece. I left it the natural wood color. So once this is all dry, I'll turn it over, and if any paint got on the bottom, I can use my sandpaper and just sand that off, or I can use a wet cloth and just wipe it off, wet distress it off, because I want the bottom to stay the natural wood color. You could of course paint it, and once you've sealed it or it's cured, it's not going to rub off on any of your other furniture, but I just like the look of the bottom being the wood color. So we're going to leave the wood on the bottom, and like I said, if there's any paint on there, I will clean it up. Since I do resell, I want it to look nice and finished. And I also will probably put some of those little felt pads on the bottom, and that just keeps it from scuffing up the table or the shelf or wherever you decide to put it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this type of video, please give me a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to my channel. We do this type of project quite a bit, taking old things that have either been donated to a thrift store or been thrown away on the street. I have been known to pick things up off the street, and I refinish them, give them a new life, make them more modern looking, and to fit into the farmhouse or the cottage type decor. So if you really enjoyed that type of video, want to learn more about how to paint pieces with chalk paint, please consider subscribing so that you can join us on the next video. Again, thank you for giving me a little bit of your time, and I'll see you next time.